We've got an esteemed panel today, and arguably one of the largest panels in Zoom land, and therefore hopefully one of the most informative panels. We really thought this would be a good way to get some opinion from the wider industry, and I think we've got a really good representation of the industry and NGOs on the panel today. So what I'll do is I'll ask all of the panel maybe to introduce themselves, particularly because my pronunciation of people's names is really terrible. So maybe if we start with Leva, for yourself and where you're from, please.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me today. It has been such an interesting journey to sit and listen to everyone speaking so far. So my name is Brenna and I work for the UNODC and I'm a cybercrime policy officer.
Brilliant, thanks Leva. And Hui?
Hi, thanks, Andy. Just wanted to say thank you for APWG and ScamAdviser for organizing this conference. My name is Hui Ling Goh. I'm counsel for international consumer protection at the Federal Trade Commission.
Thanks, Hui. And then over to Kelly, please.
Hey, Kelly Hardy. I'm the head of registry policy at CentralNIC, and this has been a really interesting conference. I think there's a lot of really unique stuff happening here.
And Tal, good to be working with you again. Over to Tal, please.
Yes, Tal Goldstein, thank you very much. Head of strategy for the Center for Cybersecurity of the World Economic Forum. And I'm very happy to be here. I actually learned a lot in the day so far, and I'm getting to know many interesting organizations and actors in this field.
And by the way, apologies. I keep on forgetting to pronounce Hui as Hui Ling, so apologies for that. And moving on to Dr. Ioannis.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ioannis Askoxylakis. I work for European Commission. DG Connect is the Directorate General for Communication Network, Content and Technology. And I work on a cybersecurity technology and capacity building unit as a cybersecurity policy officer.
Brilliant, thank you. And making my life easier for pronunciation, Phil.
Good afternoon, and thanks for inviting me. I'm Phil Lewis, and I'm the Director General of the Anti-Counterfeiting Group, ACG, which is one of the world's leading trade associations in the fight against counterfeiting. And we're a not-for-profit organization based in the UK, representing around about 3,200 multinational brands.
Brilliant, thanks, Phil. And then last and certainly not least, because I've been going anti-clockwise around my screen, Angelo, in case you think I did ladies first deliberately. So Angelo, over to you, please.
Thank you, Andy. My name is Angelo Grieco. I'm Deputy Head of the team which in the European Commission and the Director General for Justice is responsible for consumer law enforcement and redress. I would like to thank you, the organizer, for inviting me. And congratulate all the speakers who have delivered a very interesting presentation.
Brilliant. So let's kick off. And I think we've heard a lot of some of these answers already. So I think you will know if we can give an extra personal perspective to some of these things, that would be great. So the first thing is scams come in many forms and disguises. So what are the trends you're seeing? Because I think unique trends. I think maybe if we kick off with Phil on that, would that be okay?
Yeah, fine. Yeah, thanks, Andy. Right. Okay. Well, it's in terms of counterfeiting, which is what the prism I'll be looking at. Things have changed quite considerably over the last year. But let me just try and put this into a picture for you. Consumers being confined over the last year have become more interconnected with online shopping, and they've turned to less familiar online markets, perhaps, to fulfill their needs. During the pandemic, in fact, we saw all types of fakes. But those that were primarily of concern were aimed at playing on people's fears, such as fake sort of COVID-19 remedies, sanitizers, medicines, face masks, protective clothing, the whole thing. But it stretched, and we began to see an emphasis on people engaging in therapeutic buying and also buying a lot of fitness equipment. This is where the counterfeiters began to target. And of course, they were stockpiling as well at the time. So consumers have mainly been buying fakes from conventional online marketplaces, as I hinted, such as eBay, Amazon, Alibaba, AliExpress, Wish, and social media platforms. And one of the things that we noticed that was changing in terms of trends was on the social media platforms. It was becoming a favorite source for the illegal sales of counterfeit goods. And one of the problems we found were the influencers that were appearing on the social media sites. And 1 in 5 posts from those influencers generally covered a counterfeit item. So this kind of influencer-centric commerce culture was becoming deeply entrenched. And we actually found at least 50,000 accounts either promoting or directly selling counterfeit goods, which was a 171% increase. So this had this was a striking upsurge, but during it all as well, government was beginning to identify a wider range of threats alongside counterfeiting, but including some counterfeiting. So I think what we have to remember is that a lot of these counterfeiters don't just focus on counterfeiting. They get involved in bogus tracing apps, cyber fraud, price gouging, targeting of vulnerable people. And we saw that they were targeting people in care homes. There was illegal money lending going on. And all were aimed at stealing our money. And that's the bottom line, stealing our money and getting our personal details. So those were the kind of trends that we saw.
In other words, cybercrime is actually crime. This is crime, and it executes itself in many ways. So that's
Absolutely.
brilliant, Phil. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hui Ling, did you want to build on that from a perspective from the FTC, please?
Sure. And so I guess, similar to what Phil has said, we are seeing that scammers are following the headlines, and they're trying to take advantage of the consumers' fears, as Phil said, and their concerns. And so whether it's about their health, their jobs, their finances, or anything else that's important to them and their families. So that's what we're seeing. At the FTC, we've been monitoring consumer complaints, and for a variety of scams, but specifically related to during the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we're seeing, similar to what Phil has mentioned, is that we're seeing a lot of complaints about deceptive claims for treatments and cures. Financial scams, the impersonation scams and phishing scams, and also through robocalls. So online shopping has emerged as the sort of top complaint category for consumer complaints related, during this COVID-19 pandemic. So that's kind of what we're seeing. We do at the ftc.gov website, we do have dashboards, interactive dashboards, where we release these charts are sort of updated pretty frequently that show more statistics and breakdowns of the numbers and the volume. But, just to give a rough idea, since January, consumers have reported a loss of $182 million, and that's based on over 247,000 complaints.
Wow, amazing. Before I move on to the next question, I just want to remind the audience that clearly questions for the audience are much more fun for the panel because they don't know what you're going to ask, whereas they may have a clue what I'm going to ask. So please do keep on asking questions, and I'll keep an eye on that if we can. Moving on, and I think maybe we'll put this to Kelly and Tal initially. So plenty of people say this isn't my issue. In other words, it's the job of the police or the nation states. That normal crime isn't fought by normal people, it's fought by policemen and women. So how come cybercrime and fraud somehow is somebody else's problem? So Tal, maybe if we can start with you on that, please.
Yes, thank you. And no, I always find this a bit funny because just think about 8 years ago, I was responsible for devising a national strategy for cybersecurity. And back then, when the government started to look at this topic, it was actually not clear that the government had a role. The question was, what is the role of the government? Because if you look at this field of cybersecurity that we all understand that is very much interconnected with dealing with cybercrime, traditionally it was a private sector responsible, or an organization securing themselves. And so it is with cybercrime in general and scam in particular that eventually the victims, organizations that managing their digital assets are the only ones that can stand and secure themselves, manage the risk, and therefore they are crucial in the process. Having said that, of course, it's law enforcement and government are crucial as well, and they only they have the authority eventually to act against the sources of the threat. So eventually what we need to talk about here is not who is responsible, but how do we work together? How do we bring those different stakeholders that are not used to work side by side into framework that will allow them to work much closer together in order to prevent those type of crimes and also act against the sources of those crimes.
In other words,
we'll discuss more about this.
Yeah, in other words, no one person has a responsibility. We all do. I guess, Kelly, yes. From CentralNIC and being in there, a big player in the domain space, have you got any thoughts to build on that, please?
I agree with what Tal is saying. It does take all of us. And while we are not, I mean, it's very easy to say, you know, we're not responsible, or, you know, that sort of enforcement shouldn't fall to us. But we do have a responsibility to keep users safe to some extent. And if we sort of ante in and decide what that level of responsibility is going to be and set a parameter for globally what we all accept as indefensible behavior, then we get ahead of other people telling us what those regulations should be. And I think it's really important as a global community that we sit down and take a look at, you know, what we are all not okay with.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of putting it. Maybe to build on that, and you know, there are some great cyber companies out there, great companies. We've just heard good words from Google, and you know, Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit is always held as a good example of a commercial organization that inputs into this conversation. So maybe to Liva and Ioannis, yeah. So should they be contributing? Are they alone? Are there good examples of how we can move forward in commercial organizations like that, helping to contribute into this debate? So Liva, first of all, please.
I think there are good examples. I think it's very important that we look from all angles, and I think they have a very valuable role to play. They see things that law enforcement perhaps don't, and I think that is probably how they can put input into it as well. And it's also on the safety of design. It's important that everyone contributes. They're creating the software, which means you also have to put in a form of safety. And they can do so because they're smart enough and they have all the equipment in the world to do so. So I'm definitely hoping on their inputs.
Brilliant. And Ioannis, if you want to add to that, and I think also it would be good to hear, because I know ENISA are certainly doing some things in the European community to look to the future. So could you pick up on that, please?
Yes, sure. Indeed, the cooperation of the public and the private sector is essential in all aspects of cybersecurity and cybercrime, of course. And in this context, at the EU level, there are several initiatives and activities, and also entities working very, very closely to these subjects. For example, ENISA, as you mentioned, the EU Cybersecurity Agency, is publishing annually a very important report, the Emerging Threat Landscape, where it provides the top threats and how the threat landscape evolves over the years. And there we will see various activities like malware to be, for example, in the core on this scam activity. Other entities like Europol with their IOCTA report, where they provide, again, in this annual context, the analysis of cybercrime across the EU. At the same time, we have various initiatives at EU level touching the member states, as for example, the Safer Internet Centers and the initiatives in this direction that are funded by the European Commission, where this type of activities can be reported, and this information can reach the authorities not only at national level, but also at European level. We have several examples where through this input, Europol was engaged, and together with national crime authorities, they were able to address and resolve several situations. So indeed, there is a lot of activity, and the partnership between the public and the private sector is essential in order to address this complex issue.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a kind of debate going on from the floor, albeit not in the Q&A, but there's a sort of question around GDPR. So I'm tempted not to pick on anyone with this, but maybe get a volunteer. And I think really the question is, has the concept and the role of GDPR either improved cybersecurity and scams, the defensive position, or has it made things worse? And clearly that's probably touching on the role of the Whois database. So I don't know if anybody wants to be brave to offer an opinion on that, please. Phil,
well,
you're always quite controversial.
Yeah, I was going to say something about GDPR. Really, it has become a bit of a problem, but it's not a problem in itself. It's a problem of interpretation, I think. You know, when we're talking about GDPR, it wasn't set up to kind of to confound us from being able to find criminals or to deal with crime. You know, it was set up for a completely different reason, and that was to protect private citizens. You know, so really, we don't find our way around it. We work with it, but we constantly try to remind people who bring this issue up that what we are trying to do is disrupt criminals and protect business and consumers, and we can always exchange intelligence and information to do that very thing. So, so really, it might sound that is as if I'm trying to undermine GDPR, but I'm not. I think GDPR is there and it serves its great purpose, but it doesn't really prevent us from exchanging information. And I think people use it in a way at the moment to try to stop, or not try to stop, but use it to prevent prevent us using it for that cause.
So it could be misused as an excuse, for want of a better word. Would that be a fair way of summating?
Yeah, I mean, ICANN's Whois policy to me is completely, I just don't understand it at all, to be honest with you, because what we are trying to do here is again trying to undermine and disrupt criminality. And if we prevent information, the golden thread of intelligence and information between those people who are trying to do this, then I think we're not just encouraging freedom, we're encouraging a Wild West situation here.
I'm glad to say we've lit up the Q&A and there aren't nearly enough time to be able to answer all the questions, but I think what we could do is consolidate some of this, and certainly some interesting learning points there. I think as we're on GDPR, but not to follow that theme, I'm keen to learn particularly from the EU Commission, so clearly Angelo and then maybe Ioannis, about what have we learned from COVID around enforcement. So I think, would it be good for you to pick up there, Angelo, and maybe give the view from Europe? I think we've heard from Eurid today, and we've obviously heard from Interpol and Europol. So could we have your view about the plans? What have we learned, and looking forward, where does Europe go? Not with GDPR, but with scams and cyber.
Yeah, I mean, what we have learned from the COVID crisis, as you know, the Commission acted with the member states authorities fairly quickly. Already in February, May, March, we started we engaged in a dialogue with the platforms. We demanded action, and as a result of that, a lot of ads and misleading offers were removed from the major 11 internet giants. Now, what we learned from that is that structural and close cooperation with key industry players is vital, such as internet platforms. They are the gatekeepers. Enforcers alone cannot do the job. It's impossible. This cooperation is so key that, however, and it worked quite well during the COVID crisis, by the way, we are still in, but we cannot just rely on goodwill. And this is one of the reasons why we are planning to address and to define clear responsibilities and accountabilities for platforms in the digital markets reform that the Commission is planning to propose actually at the beginning of December. And in this context, you know, we are aiming at improving enforcement on the digital market to ensuring a safer internet. And with this, it goes more transparency, for example, on who is admitted on a platform to trade products. We know that one of the problems in scams is that people, individuals, entities, they hide behind their websites. They relocate to avoid enforcement. So we would like to achieve a little bit more transparency on who is behind those activities, and this also on the side of the platforms, who would need to check that. And another thing that we have seen that we need to do is to, well, improve enforcement. It's a very general way of defining it, but this we would like to do through improved procedures to notify and take down infringements, and also from more stringent obligations to cooperate with the authorities.
Excellent. So to kind of follow on from that and to bring maybe Liva and Tal into the conversation, I kind of think there's a danger that Europe could become so clean that all of the criminals move to other domains around the world. So when I think of the world, clearly it's wrong not to ask the UN and the World Economic Forum. So Liva, could you build on that, please?
I definitely don't think Europe is going to get so clean that we will not see it anywhere else. But
I have to dream, though, don't I?
It would be great, but I think it's a global issue, and I think cooperation and sharing experience and sharing what's happening for other countries and realizing that these criminals, they don't work with country boundaries, and having that in mind, I think we need an approach that is more global. And I think the EU is doing a great job, and I think Europe is doing a great job, and it's great to see the initiatives coming out. And I think now we need to work on how we can make them global.
Brilliant. And Tal, could you build on that, please?
Yes, I think that and part of the discussion that we have is also the role of some of the leading actors that might be US or European based, but in fighting global crimes eventually, because the big tech companies, the security companies that might have a more Western orientation, they are the ones that see the majority of threats, they see the attacks, investigate them, and therefore they need to have the ability to work with law enforcement all over the world in the best way. We've discussed also with Interpol, for example, in the role also to make the right bridges and connections. And this is something that we need to be much better because right now, much of the cooperation, and we've heard many examples, have been based on personal acquaintance. So you know someone from the law enforcement, you're calling, and then you're creating an amazing joint effort against a specific threat. But this is not a systemic approach that we need in dealing with those threats. Another aspect of that we've seen, for example, we've discussed with some of the leading financial organizations, and they are working globally. They see that they might be, the headquarters is in Europe, but they have branches all over the world, and they suffer from attacks all over the world. So many of the actors, even the European and American actors, have interest in supporting and helping global efforts. And this is right. This is a state of mind that we need to have. And we need to make sure that the law enforcement are going in that direction, while usually working within more national boundaries. In regard to cyber crime and scams, we must have a more global approach to addressing them.
And I guess to that point, without emphasizing it too much, as we've heard already, many global internet companies such as Facebook, Google clearly aren't based in Europe. There's global internet providers which could be based in Europe or other parts of the world, and then clearly domain owners, of which we've got quite a good European and global representation. So I think that's a good angle there. And I think that maybe the next one to bring back in Hui Ling and maybe Phil. This is a contentious question. I am not one of these people, but there are many people who like buying fake goods online because they think they're getting a great deal. They bought that Versace handbag for only £20, not the 200 it should be. Clearly, fake vaccines, medicines, IT chips exist out there. And many people say, well, these companies don't pay tax. They've somehow avoided tax law, so somehow they feel vindicated to do that. There are clearly hidden dangers in that, and I think we've touched on these. So maybe, Hui Ling, do you want to give us some examples, particularly maybe ones we haven't thought of?
Yeah, sure. So I think, sometimes it comes down to consumer awareness and education. I mentioned earlier that we've been seeing complaints about miracle cures and consumers not knowing exactly that, right now, there is no cure for the COVID-19 virus. So, it comes down to a lot of the consumer education and awareness. and not knowing exactly perhaps what they may be purchasing for or purchasing on.
And I guess to Phil, how do we do that? And I think, you know, maybe I'll go back to the European team in a second, but I think the quote is building on Hui Ling's point. When I buy a car, it's got a 5-star NCAP rating, which was invented by the European Commission. So I know what I'm buying. I know it's been verified. Is there a need for trademarks? Is there a need for internet certification? But also from your experience, briefly, I guess, what are the dangers of buying from these fake scam sites?
Okay, well, can I link it to your previous question, Andy? Because when we talk about enforcement, we tend to think about policing and customs work and all of the rest of it, which is, you know, that's what we regard as being enforcement. But there's another pillar to enforcement, and I think it has to be tackled, and that's tackling demand. I don't think we've ever been really particularly good in the world of fakes in getting the messages across that will help people to protect their families. I just talk about counterfeiting again. Counterfeiting's changed a great deal from the old football shirts. Now, COVID-19 gave us a highlight to how this change has occurred, but it's been changing for a long time. I mean, in Europe, just recently, targeted actions revealed 12,000 tons of fake and substandard food, including olive oil and things like this. The whole world of counterfeiting has changed. And what we've got to be able to do as part of an enforcement strategy is tackle demand. And that means getting the right messages across to the consumers about how they can protect their families. So, I don't, as I said earlier on, I don't think we've been particularly good at it, and I think we need to sharpen ourselves. And the way I think this can be done is by finding the independent source who can put those messages out there. So I think it has to be led by government, but with a complete inclusion of industry. But on the messaging side of things, this argument about companies don't pay enough, look, they provide jobs and security and greater prosperity for people, whether we like these big companies or not, they do. Criminals don't pay any profits. All the profits they gain floods out of the economy into the criminal hands, funds other illegal trafficking such as people, drugs, weapons, child labor, the whole thing. And, you know, the bottom line is, I don't like buying fakes, but I realize that people have a bargain hunter mentality. But we need to get those messages across, because this is bringing crime closer to their doors, and it's bringing dangers closer to their families. And I think we need to be sharper at this. So it's part of the overall enforcement regime as far as I'm concerned. The bottom line is, though, who do you like your money to go to, I guess? Legitimate business that provides safety and jobs and all the rest of it, or criminals who don't care?
And you've touched on a nice awareness point, which allows me to hand it back to Leva. So I'm sure I've come across the UN pledge to pause. So could you tell us a little bit more about that? Please?
Yeah, I'd love to. 3 weeks ago, we launched a new campaign under our Verified campaign. So Verified initiative actually is about making sure that the information you're receiving online is truthful. And based on this, we launched a campaign saying pledge to pause. Pledge to pause basically means pause and wait and look at what you're trying to buy one more time, or what you're reading one more time, or what you want to post one more time. So you want people to stop, breathe, and think before you actually share or post things that you're not sure of. And in this way, we might be able to avoid some of the misinformation or disinformation that's flowing around at the moment. And in COVID, we saw this to be an incredible danger to people. And it's like, I think it's very nice, like Phil said, do you want to pay into organized crime? Because organized crime is also a problematic issue, or you can pay into businesses.
No, brilliant. That makes sense. There's a few questions, and I won't name the name of the large company who's named after a part of Brazil, frankly, but people have talked about on the chat about large online delivery organizations, I guess, and of which there are many. And the question is, are they vetting their suppliers well enough? And the build on that question is actually how many scams are out there where simply no goods appear. So we've talked about fake goods and then the dangers with that. So I guess Kelly, without putting you much on the spot, because from the domain industry, I guess it's not going to be your expertise, but there are a lot of people who use the internet. The ISPs, the domain industry, are just, if you like, the middleman and woman in that. What can the providers do more to verify their suppliers and indeed their customers, I guess?
I'm sorry. Are you asking in what the? I don't think this question goes to me. I'm sorry. Our end of the internet doesn't quite touch commerce in that way.
No, I appreciate it. I think to build on it some more, we heard in the earlier slide that the Danes have certainly used identity to allow people to confirm they are who they say they are before they buy a domain. So I guess, first of all, we could build on that. But I think to the wider audience, the question from the floor was, there are people out there, the Amazons, the eBays, the PayPals of the world, who are trading things as an intermediary. Could they do more to use identity to verify their supply chain, I guess? So maybe leave it back to you on that one, then we'll come back to you, Kelly, on the domain identity conversation.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to give this to one of the tech companies, or to one who works more specifically with that. Like we said, there is a fingerprint in everything you do online, and it's important to verify. We talk more about verifying information, not so much about verifying people. So I think maybe I'm going to throw that back to someone who works more on that issue.
Yeah, I think maybe we put it back to Phil, but I think the whole thing is that the question really is, do the delivery industry, and I will say the domain industry, do enough to verify those end users? So, so Phil, what are your thoughts, please?
Well, personally, I think some of the big platforms have come a long way. And I know that they're building techniques and systems now that are learning techniques that will allow them to identify counterfeiters and scammers much more easily. The problem is, we're dealing with a transnational criminality here, which is very sophisticated and nimble. They don't play by the same rules as we play by, and they will find their way to penetrate some of these organizations and some of these platforms. So it's an incredibly difficult job, but I do feel that some of those companies have come a long way, and they're now more easily accessible, and they're working with industry and they're working with enforcement much more than they used to. So I'm going to be a little fair there, but I have to say that more could be done. But we're moving in the right direction. So yes, we could be sharing information more quickly. We could be more proactive in finding the people that are perpetrating these forms of criminality. But it's coming along. So I would be loath to say that it's solely their problem. And I mentioned demand earlier on. People, again, criminals know what people want. They will be building their resources and their stockpiling ready for the festive seasons. And they're going to flood those systems. And these are enormous platforms. So, it's going to be a difficult job to kind of to deal with that. But I think the proactive side of things needs to be built even further and even more quickly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think just to quickly close out, because I'm conscious of time, particularly around the world, I think one getting towards a closing question, do we think there'll ever be a best practice to report scams? Clearly, ScamAdviser and commercial organizations are good examples, and we've heard from everybody from Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia today. So maybe to throw to Leva, Hui, and then Hui Ling, sorry, and then Tal. Do you think we could ever see a global, I don't know, UN scam reporting site? That's probably a bad example, but do we think this is, because this is such an international problem, we're trying to deal with it nationally? I guess that's really the question behind the question. So Leva, first of all.
Yes, maybe in the long run, maybe we will see a global response. I think the first thing we need to see is joint action. We need to see public-private partnerships. We need to see a global approach, and we need to see all links connected. And then I do think we might be able to see this, but it won't be able to have one approach that will work for all without having any form of adoption. It's 10, I think. So we might have a global standard, but it will have to probably be adapted to the issues at hand in each country, because we all attend to national laws in the long run.
And I guess to pass that over to Hui Ling, you know, if I were to report something to the FTC, clearly I'm sure eventually you'd be able to share that globally. But do you think we need a global standard here, or is the nationalistic sharing approach the right way?
You know, I think maybe one thing to do is just to make it easy as possible for consumers to report their scams. That's probably the best way, just make it as easy as possible for the consumers. One project that we are working on is econsumer.gov. It's we've worked on this with our counterpart foreign agencies through the International Consumer Protection and Enforcement Network to develop a website in 8 languages for consumers to report their international scams. And then on the back end, for law enforcement agencies to access those complaints, spot trends, see patterns, use them in their investigations. As to whether there should be like a standard, you know, I think there may be some challenges because people are, you know, collecting the data and the complaints, but it's for different purposes. So, you know, over time, you know, it's just different data sets maybe maybe a challenge. The complaints that are reported through the econsumer.gov website, they are housed in a database called the Consumer Sentinel Network. And from there, law enforcement agencies, you know, all around the world, and even our domestic agencies in the US, they're able to, you know, work and access those complaints and to sort of see how we can combine all the complaint data to see a bigger picture.
Brilliant, thank you, Hui Ling. And there's a lot of love in the chatter, for want of a better word, that is saying certainly making reporting easier, however it's done, is clearly what people need, because there isn't awareness of that. And actually, to echo all of the panel's thoughts, and I'll echo this personally from friends I know who've been scammed only this week, the general level of awareness and the things people will do never ceases to amaze me. So conscious of time, Tal, would you like to give us some kind of closing thoughts on that, please?
Yes, thank you. And for your question, I think that in the ideal world, we might want to strive toward, you know, a global approach, a centralized approach, but this is probably not feasible. And also to what Hui Ling said, that we want to make it easy. A centralized global reporting will probably not be easy to any of the stakeholders. So we need to find a way, while we have a distributed approach, still to bring all the different stakeholders together. So we have a decentralized approach, but at the same time, we try to align everything and bring the different actors to understand and collaborate, share information as much as possible. So it's a more overarching approach. I can mention here that we are actually next week going to publish a report for 12 months work that we have done with an amazing group of law enforcement and security company and platform providers, seeking ways to collaborate in investigating cybercrime and working against cyber criminals. And the main recommendation was that we need to work in distributed ways, that we have different frameworks that facilitate cooperation, but at the same time, we need to find a way for all of those stakeholders that we call them the node network, to bring them all together for a long-term strategic alignment. So I think this is a general approach we need in this type of threats.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, I'm tempted to give a very brief closing word to Kelly, because I've not picked on her nearly as much as the rest of the panel. So I think going back to our previous presentation, we've talked about working with domain owners, APWG, internet providers. Is there anybody we're missing in this equation? I think today's whole GOS event has really been a good bringing together of scams, fraud and cyber. Are there missing people out there? And if so, where would we go and find them? Please.
Well, I do think that there is a quotient that we forget when we talk about this. And one of those areas is in reporting. So we work with registries from all around the world, small countries, large countries, and everyone is sort of saying the same thing. But when they're approached by an entity that is reporting cybercrime, there isn't a great way to tell if that entity from another, part of the world that is completely, has no connection to where they are if that entity is legitimate. So I think there is also a need to sort of be vetting at sort of the state level as crime is being reported. So there's like an international sort of grouping.
No, that makes complete sense. Brilliant. Well, thank you, everyone. Like I say, that's probably the biggest panel we've had in Zoom land and probably the most diverse. There are millions of questions, well, seemingly millions of questions out there in the chat, many of which probably when people are naming large global organizations and are suggesting that maybe they can help in there. So for legal reasons, we won't mention them all because we would have to mention them all. So I'm simply going to close out by saying that was very informative. Thank you, everyone. I think we've tried to answer as many of the audience's questions as we can, but thanks, audience, for participating with that. And I'll hand back to our host, the great Professor Abraham, to close us out, please.
Thank you very much, Andy, and a big thank you to all the panelists for being here and sharing all your knowledge. And Andy, also my compliments to you for being able to manage it all. I would like to give the floor to Foy for for wrapping up the day and ending it well. Foy, the floor is yours. Oh, let me unmute you.
Oh, my turn to be muted when I shouldn't be, hey? Thank you so much. Just let me say especially thank you to Jory and Andy. Pulling this event together, it actually came across a lot easier than I expected. Jory gets a lot of the credit for, I'm pointing to him because he's over there on my screen, I'm sorry. Very pleased. I think everyone, the content was great. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to all the speakers. I'm not about to try to go through everyone individually, but just let it be known without the contributions from our participants, our speakers, obviously we have no event. Soon we'll be sending out some questionnaire for a follow-up for all the attendees, everyone registered. Please respond, let us know how it went for you, what was good, what was bad. We hope to make this an annual event. Maybe we can even make it an in-person event in some time in the future. We'll see. I'm not holding my breath at this point. But yeah, I don't want to take much more time. I mean, we've already been almost 5 hours. And for me, that means I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning. So I have a nap in my near future. Yeah, thank you again. And unless Andy or Jory want to say a final goodbye, again, please respond to the questionnaire and see you all again soon. And we'll, I know we were going to put the videos available too. So again, that'll be in the follow-up emails. Thanks.
And I'll just say a final goodbye and thank you to everybody again. And yeah, thanks for, this has been a marathon, both in terms of 4 or 5 hour Zoom, but thanks to all the organizers and to all of you still out there in audience land. Yes, we've built you a platform to help to share data. So all we can do is get in touch and help to work together. So in previous conferences I've been to, everybody says we should work together, and we've all decided to go and do something about it. So I don't want to say if you don't use the platform, then it's certainly all of your fault, but let's have the open discussion and see how much we can start sharing a lot more into as we get into 2021. But thanks again.
And then to conclude on my side, Andy, Foy, the Global Cyber Alliance and the Anti-Phishing Working Group, thank you very much for organizing this event together with ScamAdviser. To all the participants, we really would have loved to have you have a beer together with us. It's going to be a virtual beer this time. If you like to continue in the chat, you're very welcome to stay for another half hour. And otherwise, I wish you all a very, very good evening. And I hope to meet you face to face in 1 year time. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Ciao, everyone.